Okay, there we go. So yeah, we're just a few minutes after, so I'll make a start. Welcome everyone to the webinar, Breaking the Deadlock, Designing a Hybrid Plan for the Whole Firm. Thank you for sharing some of your time with us and showing interest. As I was mentioned in the preamble, pre-chat, we want this to really be a conversation. So if you have questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, challenges that you are facing, please raise the chat or the Q&A, whichever you prefer. We'll be monitoring both and we'll jump on them either as we discuss or at the end, whichever is more appropriate and depending on the flow. Before we get into official proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge country. Even though I'm currently in Malaysia, I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we live on, that you live on, wherever across the great nation of Australia, and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and thank them for their work. I'd encourage you, invite you at this point to introduce yourselves as well in the chat. Share your name, your firm, your role if you wish, if you're comfortable, and perhaps where you are in Australia or where you're dialing in from. A brief outline of what we're going to cover today. So we're going to talk a little bit about purpose, why we decided to do this webinar. And then we'll talk a little bit about the things that we believe and more to set a frame for what we're going to discuss. And then we'll get into some of the deadlocks that we've seen, some of the tensions that exist in this conversation. And then finally, what we think is working. And we hope that last section will really be a collaborative piece as well, because again, if you have things that work for you, ideas that you've heard of, or things that you've put in practice, we'd really like for you to bring that to the table. So purpose, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of research around hybrid working, in among research organizations, universities. Swinburne put up a really good paper on hybrid work, but also we're seeing more and more of that in the mainstream media. There was a piece in the ABC, I think a few days ago, around hybrid work. Why have another webinar when there's so much out there on hybrid work? Basically, we felt a lot of that was pitched specifically to the professional services community. And we thought there's value having a conversation within that community around the challenges that we are facing in the space. Hence, another conversation. We also believe really in the benefit of hybrid working. And speaking a little bit on behalf of David and Adam, and I'll invite David and Adam to introduce themselves and share their motivations for this webinar and their interest in the work. But speaking on behalf of for myself, pre-COVID, I chose to work fully remote because I have 2 young children and no extended family, and it just allowed me to better balance home life and work, and really discovered in that process a different view of work and how work was meant to be or could be situated within my broader life. And I think we're at a position now where many people have had that realization, and post-pandemic are thinking about how to readjust or what that new view of work needs to be for them. And so the value we feel that we can bring as individuals, as professionals in this space, as leaders of P&C teams in firms, I think is really around how to best strike that balance between giving people that freedom, giving the businesses some certainty, planning a sustainable approach to manage hybrid working. We also, in Performance Leader, believe and always have believed in cultures, a strong culture of recognition and feedback. We think that's central to not just the ability for a firm to form and to grow, but to connectedness. Connectedness with each other is more than tools like Zoom. It's really having a shared sense of purpose, a shared sense of where your goals are as an individual and how those align to everyone in the firm, and then giving feedback and recognition when you achieve those goals or when you do things that lead to the achievement of or align with the success of those goals. And more than ever, that's incredibly important now that we are working in a much more distributed and flexible way. At this point, I would like to, let's hear from someone else other than me. So, David, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do at ShineWing and your interest, or your where you sit in this flux of hybrid work.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the head of people and culture at SW, previously called ShineWing. We're an accountant and advisory practice with about 300 people on a national basis in 4 cities. And also we have a number of employees overseas in working in different countries. I'm also a consultant to a range of other clients. So it's not just SW I work for, but other organisations and industries beyond professional services firms. Look, this topic is pretty hot for us as we go through the whole transition between pre-COVID and post-COVID, and working through the changes that have been fast-tracked in many ways. So it is a topic that I'm often speaking to my team at SW, but the leaders within the business, how we manage it, what can we do to, in some people's words, bring people back into the office. But it's broader than that. It's actually trying to tap into the benefits that this fast-tracked hybrid world has brought us. So I like hearing from other people and what they've worked. Sometimes people are introducing practices that I don't necessarily support, but sometimes they have a short-term benefit with a long-term detriment to the overall culture of the business. So these are the kind of things that I'm keen to talk about and find out more about what some other people are doing as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, David. Adam, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, David, Logan. Thanks for inviting me to join. And, again, apologies on behalf of Leslie, who would love to have been with you today. And I'm coming to you today from actually the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, even though I'm usually on Wurundjeri land, but I'm in Sydney for, as Logan said, an in-person conversation on hybrid with some other clients. So very topical for me. So my interest and WTW's interest in this is actually incredibly broad, given the nature of the work that we do with clients. And so we come to this, particularly from my perspective, from a very broad employee experience lens, and looking to understand how do we support businesses and firms to achieve their objectives through creating the employee experience that is going to best align employee preferences and needs with business needs. And so, the topics that we're engaged with clients are about, how do we best understand those needs from employees? How do we best align with the strategy and the cultural elements? And, to David's point, balance some of these potentially conflicting needs, or potentially in contrast needs, but also be alive to the risks that are inherent in this experiment we're doing. And so, that's the other piece, which is to understand that nobody knows the answer here. We're having to find a path sort of with our clients and with clients within their firms in conversation around what are our needs, what works, what suits the particular circumstances of this organization. So our interest is around all of those areas. And then my responsibilities are around leading a global community of practice for WTW. So I have a cultural lens, cross-cultural lens that we also then need to think about for organizations about, does this policy work in Turkey and Brazil and Australia and Singapore and Malaysia? So for any firms that are crossing boundaries, we have these other cultural factors to consider as well.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, David. I think that's really interesting from the point of the cultural differences, and it'd be really interesting to explore if we get to that, if that's interest, how hybrid work or your preparedness for hybrid work shifts the nature of your business in other ways and makes you more perhaps tolerant or resilient to other kinds of working across different cultures or time zones. But on the point of having answers or not having answers, in some of our pre-discussions, there were some things which we did have, or quote unquote answers to. It's a very broad space. So we thought it may be helpful for the purposes of this webinar to frame a little bit of the conversation. So, and I'll invite again David and Adam to add some context to this, but just for the to again set some parameters. When we talk about hybrid, we're really talking about a working arrangement where you have some days in the office and some days from home or from elsewhere, or having sustained periods of work away from the office. Right? Earlier this year, I worked 3 or 4 weeks from the Middle East, and that was my sort of hybrid arrangement. We all believe on this panel that hybrid is here to stay. We don't think it's going to snap back to a return to office once, for a variety of reasons. We think primarily because people and firms are functioning well in this situation. But there's always going to be illnesses, there's going to be floods, there's going to be, and our tolerance towards working while sick has rightfully, I think, changed. And we shouldn't be bringing illnesses into the office. Whereas once it was acceptable to do so, it's now not, and it shouldn't be. And the other thing we talked a lot about in our pre-prep was this notion of how do we shift behavior? And we all thought that, it's a pull or a push or attraction instead of a promotion approach is preferable, again, for a variety of reasons. But I'm interested, David, to hear from you around how hybrid is working in Churn and some of the things that you're having to balance. And so where's the drive for people to stay at home, or who's pulling people to come back into the office?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think just to cover the first point about what hybrid means, I'm seeing a lot more people like you're doing, Logan, is actually going overseas and for certain personal reasons, but they're working from overseas for a period of time. Now, that was probably not heard of a couple of years ago. And even when it began 2 years ago, we probably didn't think that was a sustainable activity. But a lot more people are now seeking a lifestyle to say, well, I wish to visit family, or I have a certain desire to visit a certain country, but I still want to work and still want to continue to provide services to my clients. So that is something that we all as HR practitioners need to think about, because it actually brings in a lot more different aspects we need to address, such as, even if it's a longer term decision, then how do we deal with some nuts and bolts around payroll tax and work cover, et cetera. So they're the things that we need to think about as well when people start bringing in broader definitions of hybrid work. It's certainly here to stay. And I think the question is, what form does it take? I think we still have some old school practitioners to say, well, COVID's over, let's return to the office, get everyone back in on a full-time basis. I think the mandating of days is not the right approach, because I think you do risk losing people, and you need to set a framework, an experience that attracts people to the office. So at SW, we've actually introduced a number of initiatives such as provision of food. So we have Muffin Mondays, and we have pho bowls on Tuesdays, and with different types of food that people feel that they want to come in. Now, we actually did do a recent survey to say, what is it attracting you back in the office? And the food, although I thought was going to be probably not that important, it actually ranked number 5 for the reasons why they come to the office. So it is actually working. It's expensive. Let's not just describe, get away from that. It is expensive, but it actually is actually bringing in additional benefits that I didn't necessarily think would happen. But it's actually creating those water cooler moments where I had lunch the other day with one of my team members, and the chair sat down with us, a board member sat down with us, a divisional head sat down with us, and it was a fantastic experience. So therefore, all of a sudden, you wouldn't have had those experiences when you're working from home. So you've got to make sure that you have that positive experience when people come in. So that's one of the things we're trying to work on. The other thing we've done is a sticky day, where people say, let's try and be in on a Wednesday for a certain team or a division where they set their week around having a day that most people come in. So to help with the whole collaborative aspect of working remotely, but able to get the benefits of working collaboratively and together and working in a team, because that was number one reason why people were coming to the office, to collaborate with team members in our survey. So if you don't have those sticky days, people will come in and say, well, no one's here, so where's the collaboration? So you need to provide, I believe, that forum or framework that ensures that collaboration can occur, because people expect to be in the office on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever day that might be.
Yeah. You mentioned some people are keen to get people back in the office. Have the muffin Mondays and sticky days worked? Have you appeased those people?
No, look, the ones that want people wanting back in the office, they're saying we want them back 5 days a week, and I'm just saying that's not going to happen. I don't think we need to happen, because I keep saying to them, what is broken that you wish to fix? And they say, well, they've got to be in the office, and I go, why? And I know the reason why. There are certain absolutely benefits of being in the office: social interaction, learning, collaboration, creativity. Those things are very important. So I get that, but there's you can still achieve those things without being mandating a 5-day in the office attitude.
Yeah.
So
Thanks, David.
yeah,
No, sorry, I cut you off.
that's right.
Adam, are you seeing something similar? Is it just people's preferences, or is it the nature of the business, or the role?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. So I think building from where David has described things. So we're certainly seeing, organizations try to recognize, exactly as David said, people are not going to come back 5 days a week. And if you try and mandate that, you will have a real talent problem. And so, leaders who have that mindset, we do need to work with them to get beyond that perspective, and to, again, David, excellent points. What's broken right now that you're trying to fix by forcing people to come back to the office, because we know it's not productivity. That's not the problem. Yes, there are some questions about long-term capability development for particularly more junior people. Are they getting exposure to on-the-job training in the way that they were? But they're things we need to solve for in a hybrid world, rather than go back to what we did before, which was just say, we'll just have them sit in the office so that they're there when I want to grab them. So we're seeing all that, but I think the pieces that we also extend into, and David, I think, alluded to this, it's not just where and when they do the work. So, the flexibility of when that you have when you're remote, and the flexibility of where being remote in the office, it's what work you are doing and how you are doing it when you're in those two places. So the sticky days, we see a lot of organizations adopting, and that works quite well to bring people in. For people to get the value out of those sticky days in terms of the kinds of interactions they want to have, we also need to do some work around what work are they doing when they're in on those sticky days. Because if they just come in and do transactional work on matters or clients, then that's not achieving the social interaction, the collaboration, the ideation, the innovation objective. So that's where we need to think about, okay, if we're going to have a sticky day, let's structure that sticky day to make sure that it incorporates chunks of in-person learning and development, interactions, utilizing the food to create social engagement and those elements. So that's the sort of changing a little bit about the what we do on those days when we're in the office, so that it doesn't just become a location change thing. Now that's easier said than done in professional services environments, because clients are clients and they will need things from you on those days. And so you can't just say, well, nobody's available because we're doing a team thing. So it's not as simple as it is in potentially in other corporate environments, where we can say, we're going to just not, we're going to do this internally, and we don't really have the demand of a client calling up for something. But again, these are solvable problems. We can manage around them. We always have managed around them, and that's the element we need to think about. The other thing that I think we're seeing probably in organisations that were already quite far down this pathway, particularly in their future of work strategy, is the starting to think about, can we accelerate what work is done by people in what roles, and looking at, does this give us an opportunity to enhance the use of automation, either in in task replacement or in augmentation of work. And so if the work can be done by people who aren't physically in the office, it doesn't require a high degree of interaction, then that suggests that it's potentially automatable in some way. And so we see some clients trying to continue down that pathway or accelerate moving down that pathway through hybrid work. And I just to finish David's point again, and this is the last point, it is absolutely about attraction. And for us, that comes back to the employee experience, right? So what is the employee experience that we can offer in the office that we can't offer for someone who doesn't work in the office? And how is that valuable to our proposition as an organization? How does it further facilitate the achievement of our organizational objectives? And so when we look at our employee experience framework, you talked about purpose. So inspiring connection to purpose is is more challenging when people are remote and digital than they are when they're in person. And so there's opportunities for that connection, that inspiration around purpose, but also some of those other elements around growth and the sort of drive for success in the business that we can do, as well as the experience of inclusion that you get through being in the office.
Yeah, I'm going to take you on that inclusion, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, because I think that's some of the challenges and the deadlock that we really want to get into. But I think I like this conversation a lot. I think, earlier piece, I think Adam, you mentioned, use the analogy of retail. You can buy everything you need online. Why do you come into a store? And you come into the store for the experience. And so the product is the same in the sense that I'm buying a phone, but why I go into the store to get the phone. So why the clients come into the office is a bit different. If you can do that on a call, you do it on a call, but the reason you want to come into the office and meet someone could be different. And I think there are lots of really useful analogies in this space. The retail, thinking of the on-site as the new off-site, or the off-site as the new on-site, however you wanna look at it, and really thinking about the purpose to bringing people together and creating a separate agenda for that, and a separate way of thinking about how you use that time in that space. But just picking up on the last thing that you said, Adam, and we want to get to the deadlocks. It's in the title of this webinar. So let's get into the deadlocks. Where are the tensions? How do we articulate those tensions, and where are the risks? What makes, a good hybrid plan, and who's that good hybrid plan to? A good hybrid plan for, I should say, rather. Okay. When we look at the research and when we listen to all the conversations we're having with people, there are a few reasons that are driving someone's preference for or against hybrid. And among them, and these are the key ones. And yes, I'm very proud that I managed to label them all with the C. The first one, and a major driver, is the commute to the office. The longer, the more complex your commute is, the more likely you are to want more flexibility with your work, right? That was something that we saw before, but it's just created this sort of stickiness post-pandemic. Closely following the commute and very related to the commute is the convenience from working from home. If you are sharing your working space with other individuals, living in a share house, you're younger, or you're sharing them with little people, humans, you need to care for them, it's hard to get space for you to do your work. You're going to want to work in a separate space when you come to the office. And the converse is also true. If you've invested in a setup, you've invested in shifting your mindset and even developing new skills to be able to work from home. And again, maybe this comes back to that automation point you were making, Adam. I've learned how to parcel my work up, and created new structures. I've aligned tasks. I've trained myself and my team to work in this way. It's more convenient now for me to work from home. Uh, Codependence is also incredibly important. So if I'm working on a task that requires very quick, almost immediate input from others, then I'm going to want to work in the office or have those people around me. So it may not need to be all in the office, but I definitely want to have my team working together in a more synchronous fashion. Whether you're how interested or how much you need to have a community around you. And in conversations with some firms, this is interestingly something younger employees, junior associates are really interested in. They want to come into the office to build that community of friends and learners. But when they come into the office, partners are not around, other people are not around, and they don't feel like they're getting that full community sense and feeling. Right. So this, I guess, goes back to the point David was making about those Muppet Mondays. If you structure an event and they're coming in for the event, that's when community is formed. But that's a key aspect. And also then I should say that if you have, you build strong relationships in the office or in your office community, and those relationships can exist regardless of where you work. Like I was working remote for 2 years and I felt like I had a really strong sense of community with my remote workers, almost stronger than in some senses of being in the office with these other individuals. And maybe in the pandemic and kind of bringing people into your home helped build to some extent that sense of community. But regardless, firms need to be thinking about how we help employees build a strong sense of community. And last but not least is collaboration, and maybe another C word, creativity. People feel that happens better when you are physically present together. That's not always the case. Silos were a thing even when we're all in the office, like creativity was a thing even though we're all in the office. But it is, I guess, something very obvious that people tend to look for as a problem to solve, but not really necessarily measure how collaborative we are and where the collaboration is coming from or who should be collaborating with each other. So these are some of the major drivers that we're seeing in the data through conversations. If you have any other drivers for people to come to the office, pop that into the chat. Alison makes a great comment here around the sense of community and belonging and really tying that to recognition. Right? So if you are recognized for your contributions, then you feel like you belong to that community. And I think that's a fantastic point we're going to pick up a little bit later also, Alison, that good work often doesn't speak for itself. If you want to make a hybrid distributed workplace work, you need to really invest in recognizing work and recognizing contribution. And I think that's a beautiful way to tie that back into community. But here's where I think some of those deadlocks arise. Like these criteria, these motivators for hybrid don't impact everyone equally. Some people are impacted by it more than others. Some people are more able to overcome them and have more choice and more control over those factors. So when forming a hybrid plan, we need to be really concerned or careful that we're doing it in a way that is equitable. David, I'd like to throw this to you to talk about maybe, how you see, whether you're seeing these trends impact certain groups more than others, and how do you think we can address them, or if not even address them, maybe we can just explore some of those tensions.
Yeah, look, I think the commute to the office is probably the biggest deadlock that people really struggle with. Sometimes they've got used to that hour and a half to 2 hours that they haven't had before, and therefore those people that live further away from the office tend to have a greater struggle in that respect to say, I'm going to lose so much time if you expect me to commute to the office more often than once or twice a week. So that's probably an area that's difficult. One of the things that I think we've, not formally, but this has been part of our flexible approach, is that there's no start and finish time today. So people, if they believe they need to leave early to miss out on certain issues with travel or whatever, that gives them that flexibility to come and go during the day as appropriate. I think the community side of things is probably more important for more junior people sometimes. Like some of the things that I know when I started as a graduate, that bond that you had with your friends and your fellow graduates was quite important. Not only in your work but your career later on. But I think we need to create something for our newer people to organisations, and I think there's a greater focus on many organisations to create a greater link with community, so people feel not only just bonded to the organisation, but what the organisation does for the community as well. So I think we're trying to put a greater focus on interaction with community and CSR activities and putting together reconciliation action plans. They're the kind of things that are becoming more important. And I think that will then create that bond for those people that aren't actually physically in the office as much as others. And collaboration, again, trying to create those spaces in the office that can support collaboration rather than just having workstation after workstation, having different environments within your office, again, at a cost. But this is where a lot of places are dealing with that. And my biggest issue, I suppose, that I don't know whether it fits into this, but I am worried about the seniority or the junior employees as to how they learn. If they're not in the office, and if people aren't in the office that can teach them or exhibit behaviours that they can observe or hear. So I think that the junior people or less experienced individuals, although they might not know it, they're going to potentially miss out on some of the experiences of learning that others more experienced have gained over the years. So somehow we need to make sure that they get that learning, and it's not necessarily coming into the office to do that, but we need to build some other framework to help those more junior people who are less experienced to learn and to bond with each other and the organisation.
Yeah, thanks, David. And Adam, I'm keen to hear what you think about seniority and training. And I know you have some interesting data to share after this as well. But just to kind of add a little bit to what you were saying, David, on that collaboration and spaces, we've seen some fascinating approaches by some firms, and some of them even pre-pandemic, of having a real team-based approach to how they set up their work environments. So it's not associates in a large firm. They come in and they work in a particular office, and then maybe a satellite office, and there's 5 people, and not all just juniors working together. They've got a partner, they've got a senior associate, they've got everyone working together in that sense of team. And so they actually want to come back and work in that sense of team and in that team. And when they're distributed, they still feel connected to that team because they've synchronized a sort of way and time of working with each other, and they don't actually feel like they lost connection with their team. So some of this is, David, as you say, then changing the location of work and giving people the opportunity to come in and say work in a big space. But I think others maybe just restructuring what your team looks like and where you work and how you work, and doing that purposefully, intentionally, rather than just saying, here, there's space, you can come and work in this space. Because then you have that, situation like in the library, and everyone's sitting around a big table. We've all got our headphones on, though. No one's really talking to each other, but we're all next to each other, rubbing elbows. But yeah, Adam, I see you nodding away. Why don't you jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this is a fascinating area. We certainly see from, the survey data that we've been collecting both with clients and the research we've been doing, the more senior you are, the more comfortable you are with not being back in the office, the less impact you think it has on your ability to perform and learn, because, and to collaborate. So the challenge that David is talking about with more junior people, with a smaller network, with less experience, that is real. And I think that is for firms in developing their future capability, an important area for them to focus on, and to think about how do we deliver the learning, the on-the-job learning opportunity, but also the sort of other capability and growth building opportunities. And my concern is that we'd already shifted very much to an online on-demand world in learning. And I'm a little bit concerned that everyone will just do that as a default without thinking about, is that the best way to deliver these learning experiences and get the outcomes that we're looking for? So that would be my just flag for people, is just not to assume, because it's easier, and it is easier, and it's very cost effective. but it may not deliver the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. The flip side, one of the challenges has always been getting juniors exposure to the client and the work and because we couldn't take a troop of 5 people to every meeting because the client didn't like, all these people descending on them. In a virtual world, that becomes a bit less of an issue. So we can have more junior people shadowing interactions with clients and getting the benefit of that learning that we probably wouldn't have done before because it just didn't feel right to turn up to a client with a team of 9 people just to have a 1-hour conversation. Whereas now people can join and be silent and listen and learn as long as we're upfront with the client, obviously, about what's going on there that they're aware of. So there are some opportunities. I think inclusion is a really significant concern in a lot of respects. It's very much a risk reward balance that organizations need to find because yes, we can democratize access to some degree by using virtual tools. So there's nothing to prevent me from joining any meeting just because of location or seniority. However, there are also some potential risks, and proximity bias is one of the ones that we're very concerned about. So if you prefer not to work in the office, and McKinsey's done some interesting research that shows diverse groups prefer not to work in the office even more than the average person. So if you're disabled or LGBT plus or a woman, you tend to have a higher preference for hybrid than the average. And our concern is that our natural biases for proximity, affinity, and some of those other factors will disadvantage those people over those people who have the opportunity to come into the office all the time. The other one that's interesting that we've seen is this insight that Logan's put up. When we look at employees and their views about how has their work-life balance improved through remote working or hybrid working, 69% of people say that they have better work-life balance. However, men, particularly men with children and particularly with men with children over 5, have gained significantly more in terms of perception of work-life balance. So that's not a bad thing necessarily. However, it does raise the question of why have men gained so much more than women, and particularly, women with children under 5 haven't really gained a lot more than women with no children. So I think what we see is that we know that the non-paid work, the domestic child rearing work, is still falling disproportionately on women. And the concern we have then is that those women still are not able to bring, as much energy, focus, time to work as the men are. And so from an equity perspective and from our work on trying to make sure that we're progressing women, treating women equitably, this pattern kind of reinforces that more needs to be done with role modeling and other things inside organizations around how do we distribute work, the contribution that we make outside of work as well. So, there's it's always, as I said, it's sort of pros and cons, risks and benefits for a hybrid way of working.
Yeah, it's a great point. Lots of fantastic points, Adam and David, in ensuring that the policy is equitable. I think a lot of this also then, means that we need to have these conversations more openly and establish policies with these things in mind. And the point you make about role modeling, right? So if you have 2 days in, 3 days out, and if you have leaders in the firm who are coming in 5 days regardless, then the message that sends to others is you should be coming in 5 days, and we end up going back to the old days of working where you stay in the office until leadership goes home. And that becomes an attribute of a committed, driven individual, and then the work-life balance goes completely out the window. And that's related to that proximity bias question as well. Because you lack maybe or distrust the ways in which work is recognized and performance is done. You want to make sure that you are seen to be contributing. And the way to do that is to be present next to that person, to be the first hand in the room, the loudest voice, and all of those things. And even before hybrids, as you say, more diverse individuals with different backgrounds suffered. From things like proximity bias. And on that proximity bias point, actually, I have a quick poll that I'm going to launch on proximity bias. So I'm going to put that up here now. We can keep talking, but I'm interested to hear or to see what people in the room think or where we sit as an organization. So it's a very simple one question poll. I'm asking you if you put measures in place to address proximity bias at your workplace. We're not defining what measures, it's really up to you. Any 4 simple responses. You have them in place and you know that they're working. You have them in place, but you're not sure if they're working. Or you don't have measures, but you're planning to introduce them and you have not yet addressed this issue. Because I think, like as Adam and David says, it's really coming through as the most important question, tied again to what Alison raised in the chat earlier around recognition. If I don't feel my work is recognized, I don't feel like I'm growing in the firm, then, no matter what you do to attract people to come in, they're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, this is interesting. Logan, I'll maybe just add on that. I talked about our employee experience and the way in which we think about it has 4 dimensions, but they rest on 2 fundamental aspects that employees are looking for. They're looking for connection, right? Employees, in the way in which we work, we're looking for a connection to the purpose, connection to the people, but we're also looking for contribution, right? So we're looking for to make a contribution in terms of the work that we get to do, and to have that contribution recognized through rewards for in remuneration and careers. And so, I think, that if you can kind of take away that, what are we designing for when we're thinking about employee experience, we're really trying to think about how do we facilitate those 2 kind of very human experiences that we're looking for.
Yeah. We're at 63% in the poll. A couple of people thinking about this very deeply, which is good. It's an important question. How do you view, I'm going to put you on the spot, David. How do you view proximity bias at Shinewing, but also the other firms that you've worked at and worked with and consulted at?
Yeah, look, we haven't really addressed it as yet. I think it hasn't raised any issues just yet. I think the ability for SW to be inclusive of people who are working away from the office as well as in the office is reasonable. I think it's the biggest concerns I have are those that have chosen to work predominantly away from the office that I worry about in relation to their bias. I think it's whether they're coming in 2, 3, 4, 5 days is fine. It's the ones that choose to, for whatever reason, are doing 1 day a week or 1 day a fortnight, I am concerned about them, and they will need to be worked through. But yeah, at this stage, we haven't addressed the issue. It hasn't raised it as an issue yet, but I can see it coming, that those people potentially will miss out on opportunities, either or allocation of work or otherwise. And look, I've seen it. I have heard of stories where the allocation of work was done and the people that were offline were disconnected from the call, and the better work was allocated to those who were in the office. So that was a blatant attempt by a leader to get people in the office, which I think in the short term, apparently it worked, but long term that will have detrimental impacts, and people will potentially choose elsewhere to go or to work once they find that being going against them. But it is an issue that we'll need to address.
Yeah, thanks, David. This is more than just, and that's an interesting point. It's more than just recognizing promotions. It's who's getting the good work, who's getting the interesting work.
Yeah. Which certainly for law firms, but for professional services firms more broadly, has always been, a critical experience issue for associates and consultants, right? So, to feel that the work is distributed fairly and that the performance assessment recognizes that way that work is done. In every survey we've ever done with a law firm, it comes up as an issue for senior associates and lawyers as a source of disgruntlement where it's not being done well. Either because you're overworked or because you're not getting access to the good matters.
Yeah, and that's going to be more important now in this talent market and trying to retain.
Yeah, and so I think it's really it's encouraging to see that firms are thinking about proximity bias, and I think what we're going to see, we're early days, so to the not knowing if they're working is I think common because we're not really quite sure of what working looks like just yet, but it's going to be important to be able to track this in data, and so to be able to look at remuneration outcomes and promotion outcomes, and to assess your employee, to understand the differences in the employee experience based on the kinds of working arrangements that people are having, right? So the number of days they're in the office, those who are completely remote versus those who are not remote.
So we're going to move. So I've shared the data. That's relatively interesting and not necessarily super surprising. I think there's a lot of, as Adam and Dave saying, potential to work through and do more work around the space, have some more results in proximity bias. Natalie's asked a question in the chat. Proximity bias assumes that people giving up the work are physically present, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Although if we think about proximity and affinity being potentially merging over this time, so yes, we always thought about proximity bias as being physically closest to me, but we can also think about, and we've always seen affinity bias as another factor that's important, which is I tend to prefer people who are most similar to me in some dimension, most comfortable with. And so that's why people have go-to people. Right? I'm comfortable with that person, A, because I trust them to do the work, but B, because that level of comfort has been built on something. So I think we might see, the risk is that we see a merging of those two things. So it's not just physically close anymore, but it's also most comfortable with. And, we know that from a diversity perspective, this narrows the perspective and that the firm has on a particular matter. And so we want to be mindful that we need to still get breadth of perspective on things, and that we don't have these two potential factors reducing that, and therefore reducing the opportunity for people who are different in some ways and have a different perspective from contributing.
Yeah,
I think there's another issue that where the remote working or hybrid working has led to, and this is features in systems like Teams and Zoom that you can actually see who's online and who's not, and who's busy and who's in meetings. My concern is around the health and well-being of people by being expected to be green, that I'm light, or I'm red because I'm in a call, or I'm busy, and I worry that this is the expectation from people, and probably not the features. The features weren't designed for that. That it does put a higher degree of pressure for that. They may not be in the office, but they still need to be online and switched on and accessing people. So that's a feature that I think we need to work through, and how we can limit the impact on the negative impact on people's mental health and burnout.
Yeah, 100%. It's designed to help you be aware when someone's there and you can reach out to them, but then it becomes a tool for surveillance and monitoring. And we do see some firms using this explicitly to understand how much people are working. And it comes back to something you were talking about early on in the prep, David and Adam, and it comes down to trust. And you really need to build some trust with your teams. Trust them that they are doing the work that they need to do. Trust them that they will be available and be responsive and be committed. And that trust has to be earned. And the employees will trust the firm, that the firm will look out for their best interests, that the firm will, when they say it's flexible and it's hybrid and you can take a self-care day, that you're not going to put yourself at risk by doing those things and caring for yourself and your family. And if they don't feel that trust, then they'll go somewhere else. I think in one of the surveys you're referencing, Adam, I think maybe it's a McKinsey opportunity survey. Flexible work ranked like number 2 and number 3 in the reason someone would choose a new job or change their jobs. I found that very surprising. And culture was way down at the bottom. It was pay, something else, pay, and then maybe carer, or even then flexible work. And my read of that is employees are looking at your flexible work policies as how firms are walking the talk. They're not just saying we trust employees and we have wonderful culture, but they are putting into place an actual policy that recognizes that. And maybe the next step beyond that will be things like looking at how they act upon promotion and retention, looking at what they're doing to tangible ways to address things like proximity bias. So not just saying we have hybrid work and you can choose to work at home or work in the office, but there are risks for you when you work, at home.
Yeah. I mean, flexible work used to be, something we emphasized as a potential differentiator, to be able to deliver that in a really meaningful way. Unfortunately, for organizations that were already far down that path and doing that well, and you can look at the Telstras and the Medibanks with the sort of all roles flex kind of mentality for some time, it's become not a differentiator but a requirement, right? So if you cannot demonstrate that you're going to give people flexibility, then you will find it incredibly hard to attract good talent, because why would they come to you when they can go somewhere else for absolutely the same money and have these other elements? So, it really is something organizations need to get in order if they haven't got it together. And that's the reason we don't see culture come up in those things about attraction is it's very hard to see culture from the outside. So it's always pay and benefits and career at the top 3 in any kind of question about attraction to joining an organization.
So we are 5 minutes to the end. We do have some time. Timing worked out quite nicely, actually. I'm going to ask David and Adam for their kind of key takeaways, and I'll share some of mine. But if you have questions, if anyone has questions, we still have a healthy amount of participants in the webinar. Thank you for sticking with us this long through the webinar. If you have questions, pop them into the chat. We'll address them. I should also say, if I haven't said earlier, that we will send through a copy of this deck, as well as, and there's a reference sheet after this. And we'll have a list of all the references that some of you have shared in the chat, and put that into the deck as well, and other things that we've discussed. But in terms of, key takeaways, top things that firms, staff need to work on, for me, reflecting on our conversation today and the data and the work, I think they're really two. And one is to ensure that this is done in conversation, anything that you do. And I guess this is broadly speaking, but because of the diversity involved in the motivations for people to choose a hybrid work policy, and because trust is so important, I think it really needs to be a bottom-up approach. Like David, you were saying, you did surveys, try to understand why people wanted to work from home and why people want people to come back in the office, and hold off putting in a policy and, being reactive to that situation. It really needs to be a conversation to ensure that we're not going to get it absolutely perfect, but knowing where to start that conversation, where to start the policy, and to set up that trust. And the other thing for me is good fundamentals on recognizing good work. I think as people work in a more distributed way, proximity bias, affinity bias, all the different sorts of biases related to performance management existed in the past and just become accentuated, and especially where there's a lack of trust. And it goes back to ensuring that managers, firms focus on helping employees articulate what good goals are, making sure those objectives are shared. We want to encourage collaboration, create more visibility around your objectives, and so we can collaborate more strategically and purposefully, have more meaningful, regular, consistent feedback that are linked to your goals and your objectives, and really grow that culture of feedback, a culture that's resilient to flexibility of working space. And you can have strong feedback, no matter where you work, and you don't have to come into the office to do that, and then make that the fundamentals for when you do your evaluation. You're looking at people's goals and their contribution to work that have been recognized through their feedback and from feedback from their peers.
Mm.
So those are my two takeaways. David.
Look, I think there are so many benefits to hybrid working, and I've effectively been doing it for 20 years, and having that balance is the important thing, and one size does not fit all. So I think we need to be very careful that we don't mandate things, that we don't force people and push them back in the office when it's not really broken, or there's so many benefits to it. But we need to understand that the people have differing needs, different requirements, and different purposes, and we need to keep them inclusive. So even when doing training sessions or learning experiences, make sure that you incorporate those that are not in the office and those are outside, and to have a trusting situation, like you say, Logan, to enable people to work out what's best for them, but also have that discussion with them saying what's also best for the organisation. So there's a balance there that, yes, we can say it's productive, you're productive, but there's more to productivity than, let's say, chargeable hours. There's other things that they need to contribute.
Fantastic. Thanks, David.
Yeah, there are so many threads here that I could pull off. But I think one of the things I always say to clients when we're talking about developing a hybrid work approach is that, in the past we talked about flexibility and we allowed flexibility to happen, right? You can have some flexibility of where and when you work. The big difference here is that we are designing for a world that includes hybrid ways of working. And that means that we're not just got one kind of flexibility. Some people will be part-time and some people will be remote. We have a sort of almost a continuous variety of ways of working. Now that makes it very challenging, but it also means that we have to think about this as a systemic approach, right? We can't just change a policy on flexible working and expect that our total rewards approach is going to continue to work properly, or our way in which we assess performance is going to work properly, or the design of our physical office is going to continue to work. So we need to think about this. How does this system come into place? And so for some of our clients, it's been helpful to say, what do we believe about hybrid working, right? What's at the core of a belief here? And then what behaviors do we expect leaders and employees to display? And then how do we then design the organizational systems, the enablers to reflect that, right? So we're kind of building, from the bottom up in some senses, but it's actually kind of from the inside out, from a belief about hybrid and its impact on culture, and then to try and then put in place the leader and employee behaviors and the organizational systems that reflect that. So, that can be a way that works. The other thing that we have very much seen some clients do is take the opportunity to put wellbeing in the center of this conversation and say, actually, wellbeing has become a critical issue for our organization through this process. Hybrid is a way. How do we enable more wellbeing through the advent of hybrid working? And how do we do that also, again, thinking about the kind of rewards and benefits, opportunities, supports that we provide to employees. So it changes the frame a little bit from saying well-being is something that we provide support for, to saying that actually well-being is a central purpose of what we're looking to achieve in our organization for our people as part of the employee experience. And how do we use hybrid working and total rewards and these other elements of what we deliver, connection to community and ESG, David, I think is an outstanding one, right? Social, if we're loosening the bonds inside the organization, can we strengthen the bonds between people and their local community outside the organization? It's a great lens for it. So these are the things I think we're seeing organizations start to engage with. And again, it is very aligned to this broader stakeholder capitalism movement, right? Where we're seeing this shifting concept of what it is to be an organization and to attract talent and capital, and to perform, and what is seen as performance. So, just to really make it very macro, but I think if you think about it really narrowly, you can kind of do something transactionally, but I think that misses the really transformational potential of this moment around changing the way work has been done.
Adam, you might have started a new webinar just at the end of your. So we've got a few topics for the follow-ups. Adam, David, thank you so much. I always learn so much from having conversations with you, and really value your time, your insight, and your experience. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who stuck with us to the end. We've had a pretty healthy turnout, and thank you for your contributions to the chat and to the questions, and for sharing your time with us. The recording will be shared with everyone who attended, and put snippets and stuff on online, and we'll share the deck with resources. David and Adam, if you think of anything else you want to check into that at the end, just let me know and I'll populate that, and you can expect that to go out in the next few days. This has been wonderful and enjoyable. Back to our hybrid work.
Thanks, Logan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Logan. Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.